Welcome back to Zero to Hero. Today we're doing another comprehensive match analysis. Continuing in Regulation I, today we're looking at the finals of NAIC 2025, the largest tournament held in North America, which had 1,129 players in attendance, and the competition was some of the highest we've ever seen. Today we're looking at the final match of the event with two VGC behemoths facing off. Not only amazing players, but also roommates for the event, Marco Silva and Federico Camporesi. Marco Silva is well known for being a three-time international champion, having won OCIC 2020, LAIC 2024, and LAIC 2025. And he has a plethora of other top placements, including a top 16 at Worlds 2024, and was runner-up at Toronto 2025, Gdansk 2025, and Malmo 2023. And this isn't even mentioning his long list of top cuts. Federico Camporesi is another amazing player, and although has not yet won an international like Marco, we do see a list of top placements. He won the 2025 Gdansk Regional, beating out Marco in the finals. He landed top 4 at Birmingham 2025, top 4 at Worlds 2023, and was the finalist at OCIC 2020, albeit in the seniors division. These two players build and play together quite a bit, to say the least, so they know the ins and outs of how the other plays, and this will not only be a great set due to raw player skill, but also due to their knowledge of the other player's playstyle and their extensive knowledge of the matchup. As usual, we'll break down both players' teams, consider the matchup, then analyze the set turn by turn. We do not have EV spreads for either player this time around. Just before we get into it, make sure to subscribe if you haven't. Let's get started with Federico's team first. Miraidon, Lunala, Whimsicott, Urshifu, Ursaluna, and Incineroar. Federico has been running this team pretty much all throughout Regulation I, and with good success. Miraidon and Lunala is a pairing that has rose to prominence back at Milwaukee, the first Reg I tournament, and they have comboed very well together ever since. This Miraidon spread is as standard as it gets, with a choice specs, Electro Drift, Volt Switch, Draco Meteor, and Dazzling Gleam, along with Terra Fairy. This set hits fast, and it hits hard. More interesting is his Lunala set. It's running Moongeist Beam, Moonblast, Trick Room, and Wide Guard. Along with Terra Fairy, it's a mostly standard defensive Lunala set. Part of what makes the synergy with Miraidon so good is its held item, the Electric Seed. If it can find a way on the field with Miraidon, it will consume the item to raise its defense by 1 stage, making this incredibly bulky both physically and specially, thanks to its high special defense and its Shadow Shield ability. It also provides defensive options for Miraidon, allowing it to protect it from spread attacks with Wide Guard, and increases the team's speed control with Trick Room. What's interesting is both of these restricted Pokemon are special attackers. Most good restricted pairings have one physical attacker and one special attacker. However, the rest of Federico's team makes up for this lack of physical damage. Whimsicott is the Tailwind setter for the team. Running Tailwind, Light Screen, Encore, and Moonblast, it also holds the Covert Cloak and has Terra Water. These moves are nothing new, as it's almost the same Whimsicott that won Worlds last year, and it has seen significant usage throughout Reg G and Reg I. The main difference here though is it's carrying Terra Water over Terra Dark. Terra Dark was used at a time where there was lots of opposing Prankster users, like Tornadus and opposing Whimsicott, that were running Taunt, and these would shut Whimsicott down. And the Terra Dark was used for an immunity against opposing Prankster taunts. Now that Tornadus usage has dropped significantly, and Pokemon like Zamazenta and Qianpao usage have gone way up, Terra Water gives a resistance to those Steel and Ice attacks that would otherwise take out Whimsicott in one hit. We also see Urshifu Rapid Strike on the team. With standard moves in Surging Strikes, Close Combats, Aqua Jet, and U-Turn, the main differences we see are Terra Ghost and a Choice Band. Urshifu usually run a Choice Scarf, which allows it to outspeed the fastest Pokemon in the format, Calyrex Shadow Rider. Or sometimes they run Mystic Water to get a boost to their water attacks. Choice Band is a very unique choice for this Pokemon at this point in time. Terra Ghost is also uncommon, as most run Terra Water for a further damage boost to their water attacks, and to remove its fighting weaknesses. But Terra Ghost here is also a very valid choice, as it gives an immunity to Fake Out, which is a big weakness to choiced Pokemon. Ursaluna comes in to function as the team's Trick Room sweeper. This set doesn't get more standard than this, including Facade, Headlong Rush, Earthquake, and Protect, along with a Flame Orb to activate its Guts, and Terra Ghost to turn its fighting weakness into an immunity. something very impactful again with Zamazenta and Urshifu being very prevalent in this format. Lastly, we see the most common VGC Pokemon, Incineroar. For good reason, Incineroar needs no introduction. It's the premier positioning Pokemon on every format that is legal in. As we see the meta continue to shift in Reg I, the Assault Vest has become much more common on Incineroar, to allow it to survive strong attacks from restricted Pokemon it otherwise wouldn't be able to. This does mean it needs to give up Parting Shot in favor of U-Turn. This Incineroar is also carrying Terra Bug, which is one of Incineroar's many viable Terra types. Terra Bug gives both a ground and fighting resistance, which are moves that can normally threaten and even one-shot Incineroar. So what's the game plan of Federico's team? With access to both Tailwind and Trick Room, as well as having a fast sweeper in Miraidon and a slow one in Ursaluna, this is very much a Tail Room team. Lunala acts as the glue that holds the team together. Sitting at a base speed of 97, it's fast enough to benefit from Tailwind to outspeed things like Kali Shadow and base 135s, but it's also more than slow enough to underspeed those same threats with Trick Room. It also underspeeds other threats in the metagame like Chi-Yu, Landorus, and Ogerpon. Urshifu running a Choice Band over Choice Scarf also allows it to function in Trick Room against faster teams as well. So with something like Miraidon, Lunala, Urshifu, and Whimsicott, this team has a very strong Tailwind mode to outspeed teams that don't have strong speed control and that are naturally faster with things like Calyrex Shadow. Or it can go with something like Lunala, Ursaluna, Incineroar, and Miraidon to go for a Trick Room mode against teams that can match or outspeed its own Tailwind. Even if the opponent has super fast restricteds like Kali Shadow or Zacian, Trick Room can be used to great effect even with faster Pokemon like Miraidon to underspeed those hyper-fast threats. Let's look at Marco's team next. We only see one Pokemon overlap these two teams, and it has a different set, so these teams really could not be more different. Marco is running Calyrex Shadow, Zamazenta, Rillaboom, Incineroar, Ogerpon Hearthflame, and Raging Bolt. Starting with the restricted duo in Kali Shadow and Zamazenta, we see very standard sets. On Calyrex, there's Astral Barrage, Psychic, Nasty Plot, and Protect, with a Life Orb and Terra Dark for the mirror matchup. On Zamazenta, we see Body Press, Heavy Slam, Wide Guard, and Protect. But we do see Terra Water on this set over Dragon. This makes its matchup worse into Miraidon, which we do see on Federico's team, but it makes its matchup into Pokemon like Calyrex Ice Rider, Fluttermane, and Chi-Yu much better. We've already discussed the nuances of why this specific pairing is both so powerful and prevalent in our last comprehensive match analysis. We won't go too in-depth on this pairing right now. Next up is Rillaboom, which also carries a standard set. Fake Out, Grassy Glide, Wood Hammer, and U-Turn with an Assault Vest and Terra Fire. Rillaboom might not seem like anything special, but a Pokemon we'll talk about very shortly combos with it quite well. As mentioned, Incineroar is a Pokemon we see on both teams, but they are built quite differently. Marco's is still running the Rocky Helmet to help deal with things like Urshifu and other physical attackers like Iron Hands and Zamazenta. It still has Fake Out and Knockoff, but it has not one, but two status moves in the standard Parting Shot, as well as having Helping Hand. This is also running Terra Water, again to deal with the aforementioned Urshifu, but to help with things like Ice Rider and Kyogre, while still removing Incineroar's fighting and ground weaknesses. Helping Hand is a choice that sees more use in restricted formats, as it can push the damage of a restricted ally through the roof. Increasing damage that's already quite high has a bigger impact than increasing damage that's perhaps middle of the road, as if you put a multiplier on something that's already huge, you get more of an increase than you would on something that's smaller. So seeing Helping Hand in restricted formats just has more value overall than it does in lower power formats. Ogerpon Hearthflame, however, is an incredibly unique pick for this type of team. Marco has chosen it despite already having a Grass and Fire type on the team. It's running Ivy Cudgel, Follow Me, Spiky Shield, and Grassy Glide. He forgoes the powerful Wood Hammer, or other strong options like Swords Dance, to have an additional priority attack on the team. The Pokemon that uses Grassy Glide most of the time is Rillaboom, as Rillaboom sets its own grassy terrain to enable the priority. But Ogerpon here relies on Rillaboom's grassy terrain to use this move effectively. This means that to use Ogerpon to its fullest potential on this team, Marco needs to bring it with Rillaboom. If he's bringing his two restricteds, it may seem like this really limits his options in team preview. And to an extent it does. But this showcases his amazing team building, as he knows in advance what Pokemon he needs to bring to which matchup, and he's not just trying to figure this out on the fly. He has said that he put a lot of effort into beating the mirror matchup, and it seems like Ogerpon with Grassy Glide is amazing in the mirror. Its fire attacks can hit Zamazenta very hard, and it can combo with Rillaboom to move before Calyrex with 2 priority Grassy Glides. It's also a good partner for Calyrex, being able to use Follow Me and keep it alive. Marco's last pick is Raging Bolt, a newcomer to CSR Zama balance teams, but one that fits on very well. Marco is running Thunderbolt, Thunderclap, Dragon Pulse, and Protect, with a booster energy to raise its special attack and Terra Electric. Many Raging Bolt commonly run the Assault Vest or Magnet to have increased bulk or increased electric damage. Choosing the booster energy here means that you're gaining more damage than a Magnet, and on all moves, not just the electric ones, but you'll lose the boost after switching out. This is a good choice when running Dragon Pulse to ensure that Dragon type damage still stays high enough to one-shot Dragon opponents like Miraidon and Koraidon. He also has the Assault Vest, already taken by Rillaboom on his team. Raging Bolt fits well onto CSR and Zama balance teams for a few reasons. It typically pairs well with the two, adding a fire and water resistance that the other two don't resist, and brings significant firepower with 137 base special attack, while still having strong bulk with its typing and high stats overall. Thunderclap is incredible for cleaning up after the restricteds deal big damage, or for moving first to soften up opponents for Calyrex to sweep after. What's the game plan of the team? This is a balanced team without hard speed control like Tailwind or Trick Room. That means the team relies on its defensive pieces in Zamazenta, Rillaboom, and Incineroar to outposition opponents and cycle fakeouts to stall out speed control, with the ultimate goal of bringing in Calyrex to safely sweep games. Zamazenta, Ogerpon, and Raging Bolt can be used to remove or soften up specific targets that Calyrex has a hard time breaking through. Once they're gone and the speed control is ended, Calyrex, being the fastest Pokemon in the format, can come in and clean up. So what's the matchup like? We know Federico wants to gain speed control with Tailwind or Trick Room, as it will allow his Pokemon to move before Marco's faster ones. If he can secure his speed control, he will have to contend with 2 Fake-Out users, which may not be as hard as it looks since he has a Ghost type, a Covert Cloak, and 2 Terra Ghosts on his team to deny Fake-Out pressure. Whichever method of speed control he chooses, he will need to take full advantage of it and deal big damage. Marco has no real choice but to let the speed control go up, as he has no way to deny it aside from taking KOs. He will also need to make the most out of Rillaboom and Incineroar to put Calyrex in a winning position after the speed control has ended. So which Pokemon will they each bring? They're both likely to bring both restricteds, as all 4 of them add significant value to this set. Miraidon is Federico's main damage piece, and Lunala has an amazing matchup into Zamazenta and Calyrex. Zamazenta threatens KOs on Whimsicott, Incineroar, and Ursaluna, while still hitting Miraidon and Urshifu very hard. Calyrex has a bit of a hard time in this match, having to deal with Wide Guard from Lunala, a Dark-type Incineroar, Encore pressure from Whimsicott, and a Normal-type Ursaluna. But even with all these barriers, it's still a powerful Pokemon and can bring big value if these threats are weakened or removed. Both players are also likely to bring Incineroar, as both teams rely on positioning, and Incineroar is one of the best Pokemon to help with that. Federico's last 3 options all have merit. If he wants to commit to Tailwind, Whimsicott is a must-bring. It can also Encore the opposing restricteds to lock them down. Ursaluna will be an asset should he go for Trick Room, as it threatens one-shots on all of Marco's Pokemon except for Zamazenta. Urshifu can also threaten all of Marco's Pokemon, but it seems to be his least likely choice. Being choice-locked, it's very vulnerable to the dual Fake-Out pressure Marco has, and with Miraidon also being choice-locked, having 2 easy Fake-Out targets will give Marco a lot of room to position. So Whimsicott or Ursaluna will likely come depending if he favors Tailwind or Trick Room. And should Whimsicott come, he also perhaps is more likely to bring Urshifu to benefit from the Tailwind. Marco is also all but guaranteed to bring Rillaboom here, not only to have both Fake-Out users online, but also to bring the necessary terrain control to reduce Miraidon's damage output. Ogerpon Hearthflame also adds some value if he feels he can benefit from the dual Grassy Glide, or if he wants Follow Me protection for Calyrex. Raging Bolt isn't bad here, but it's not his best bring, as it only threatens Miraidon and Urshifu super effectively, while needing to dance around immunities to its electric and dragon moves in Ursaluna and Whimsicott. Raging Bolt provides a lot of value in the mirror for Marco, so since this isn't a mirror, it's less likely to be brought. Let's jump into game 1. Both players lead both their restricteds, as we see Miraidon and Lunala come out for Federico, and Calyrex and Zamazenta for Marco. Electric Terrain comes online, and Lunala consumes its Electric Seed for a defense boost. Overall, Marco has the speed advantage, with 1 and 3 in the turn order. Miraidon, however, is very threatening, and it can pick up a one-shot on either of Marco's Pokemon, and it will likely survive an Astral Barrage. Miraidon only picks up these KOs, however, thanks to the Electric Terrain being active, so Marco really wants to switch in Rillaboom to hamper Miraidon's damage output. Ideally, he can bring it in on whatever Federico is targeting, allowing Rillaboom to sponge that not very effective electric attack. Marco and Federico are both heavily de-incentivized from swapping Zamazenta and Lunala out, since they will lose their once per battle defense boost. Lunala also has Wide Guard, which could completely negate Calyrex's Astral Barrage. With all these factors, he locks in a switch to Rillaboom. Since Zamazenta doesn't deal huge damage to Lunala, and Miraidon is currently more threatening, he locks in Body Press into Miraidon. Even if it Volt Switches, Federico's only Ghost type is already on the field, meaning whatever switches in will have to eat the Body Press. Federico cannot risk eating an Astral Barrage right now, so if Marco goes for it and a Body Press, Federico will lose both Restricteds on turn 1. He locks in Wide Guard on Lunala and Electro Drift into Zamazenta. Marco swaps out Calyrex for Rillaboom, removing the Electric Terrain, as Lunala goes for Wide Guard. Miraidon lands a weakened Electro Drift into Zamazenta, dealing just over half, and Zamazenta returns with a Body Press into Miraidon, dealing 67%. Thanks to the Grassy Terrain recovery, Miraidon might not pick up a KO on Zamazenta with another Electro Drift. Not to mention, with Rillaboom just entering the field, and Miraidon being choice locked, it's an easy fake out target this turn. Federico wants to preserve Miraidon regardless of the fake out pressure, to regain the terrain later, so he swaps it out for Whimsicott. It will also resist a possible Body Press, and won't mind eating the fake out. Federico really wants to remove Zamazenta since it threatens almost his whole team, aside from Lunala, so he locks in a Moongeist Beam into that slot. Marco, rather than going for the obvious fake out Body Press, is also thinking a turn ahead, and U-turns into Miraidon, which does a little bit of chip damage, but more importantly allows him to maintain his terrain control for later. Also, rather than go for damage into Miraidon with Zamazenta, he knows the Miraidon switch is likely for the aforementioned reasons, so he protects Zamazenta to bring in a different partner while Rillaboom U-turns, as well as giving Zamazenta some Grassy Terrain recovery. Federico swaps out Miraidon for Whimsicott while Zamazenta protects. Lunala's Moongeist Beam whiffs off the protect, and Rillaboom U-turns into Whimsicott, bringing out Ogerpon. We now know that Lunala here is faster than Rillaboom. It does have a higher base speed, but some Rillaboom are trained to be very fast, which isn't the case with Marco's. With Whimsicott on board and no special attackers to use Light Screen against, Tailwind is its best option. Remember, Federico's game plan is to use his speed control to move before his opponent, and this is his opportunity to start doing so. With Lunala being able to benefit from the Tailwind right away, it will move next, and he opts to use a Moongeist Beam into Ogerpon. Attacking Zamazenta may seem like a safer offensive play, and in some ways it is, as it can't protect since it just did, while Ogerpon could potentially Spiky Shield and block any damage. But Zamazenta does not threaten Lunala much at all, while Ogerpon can hit harder with its Grass and Fire attacks, and a possible critical hit from Ivy Cudgel would deal huge damage to Lunala, making it a little bit more threatening right now. Marco opts to attack with both Pokemon, as Spiky Shielding with Ogerpon would just stall one turn of Tailwind, but using both threats to deal damage adds more value right now. He also does not want Federico to get another Tailwind later, so removing Whimsicott is quite important. He locks in Ivy Cudgel into Whimsicott and Heavy Slam into Lunala. Whimsicott uses Tailwind, allowing Lunala to move next and land a Moongeist Beam into Ogerpon, dealing just over half. Zamazenta breaks Lunala's Shadow Shield with a Heavy Slam, while Ogerpon takes out Whimsicott with an Ivy Cudgel. Federico brings in Urshifu for the fallen Whimsicott. With Tailwind set and the setter removed, Marco now needs to navigate his win con of getting Calyrex in after Tailwind expires. So now he's working to stall out the Tailwind. Using Protect is usually key for stalling speed control, but with Urshifu on the field that can bypass Protect, there is very little value in trying to predict where Urshifu will attack and protecting with the other slot. Marco attacks with both Pokemon. Ogerpon uses its only grass move, Grassy Glide, into this threatening Urshifu. This will move before it, thanks to the priority of Grassy Glide, and will deal solid damage. He could Terra Ogerpon, which could potentially pick up a one-shot on Urshifu, with a Grassy Glide thanks to the attack boost. But since Federico has not yet Terra'd, Marco doesn't commit his Terra when Urshifu could potentially Terra to remove its grass weakness. He likely uses Body Press into Urshifu with Zamazenta as well to take the KO if both Pokemon can hit it. Federico, with the speed advantage, has less mind games to worry about and attacks with both, using Surging Strikes and Moongeist Beam into Zamazenta. Despite the Choice Band and Surging Strikes ignoring Zamazenta's Dauntless Shield boost, it's unlikely the Surging Strikes alone will be able to finish it off, so the double up is a good plan. Again, Marco is heavily de-incentivized from clicking Protect thanks to Urshifu's Unseen Fist, so this makes this double up more safe than it might be otherwise. He also commits his Terra on Urshifu, as he does not need to Terra his other Pokemon in this match, and removing the possibility of a Grassy Glide KO is a solid play. Urshifu Terras removes its Grass weakness, and Ogerpon's Grassy Glide deals around 37% to Urshifu. Urshifu Surging Strikes into Zamazenta, leaving it with 10%, and Moongeist Beam finishes it off. Marco brings in Calyrex for Zamazenta. With 2 turns of Tailwind left, Marco just needs to stall a little bit longer to gain the advantage he needs. Again, with Urshifu on board, he cannot reliably protect to stall turns, so he chooses to go on the offense. He commits Psychic into Urshifu while terastallizing Calyrex into Dark, while using Follow Me on Ogerpon. This is an incredibly safe play, as the Follow Me from Ogerpon will keep Calyrex safe from Urshifu, and the Dark Terra ensures that Calyrex will survive an attack from Lunala. By removing Urshifu rather than Lunala, means Marco can protect the following turn to stall the last turn of Tailwind. Federico is choice locked with Urshifu, meaning his only other option than switching is going for Surging Strikes, which he locks into Calyrex. Since he's hoping to remove Calyrex, and Surging Strikes does big damage, but not quite enough for a one-shot, he locks in Moonblast from Lunala to also cover potential Dark Terra. But this is not some sort of hard read. A double up Surging Strikes and Moonblast, with or without a Terra from Calyrex, will still take the KO. There is some level of mind games here if Marco will go for Astral Barrage, since that will easily pick up a double KO and win the game. But with the pressure from Wide Guard, it's a toss-up if Marco will go for it. Assuming the threat of Wide Guard is too great for Marco to click Astral Barrage, Federico commits the Moonblast here, assuming that Marco won't go for it. Calyrex Terras to Dark, and Ogerpon uses Follow Me, which redirects the Surging Strikes, falling to just 2 hits. Lunala lands a super effective Moonblast into Calyrex, which survives at 22%, and Calyrex finishes off Urshifu with a Psychic, gaining a special attack boost. The players send out their last Pokemon in Rillaboom and Miraidon. With Rillaboom being slower, Grassy Terrain takes control over Electric. Now with 1 turn of Tailwind left, Marco can protect with Calyrex and fake out Miraidon to minimize any damage coming in from Federico. Federico locks in Dazzling Gleam to KO the Dark-type Calyrex and deal some chip to Rillaboom, while also locking in Moonblast again into Calyrex. On the surface, this seems like a very straightforward turn, and with the choices they made, it is. You may have thought to yourself, however, Federico can secure the game by going for Trick Room on Lunala, while Calyrex protects. Then Miraidon and Lunala would move before Calyrex the next turn for the win. And I think this would have been an amazing play, considering Calyrex did go for Protect. But with the fake out pressure on Miraidon this turn, it's likely not going to attack. So if Lunala goes for Trick Room, Miraidon is stunned, and Calyrex attacks, that's game over for Federico, since an Astral Barrage would pick up KOs on both. With the risk of Calyrex attacking while Miraidon is stunned, a Trick Room is just a bit too risky for Federico. Calyrex protects, Rillaboom fake outs Miraidon, and Lunala goes for Moonblast into Calyrex, which bounces off the Protect. Tailwind has expired and Trick Room is not up. Marco has accomplished his goal of gaining the speed advantage with Calyrex. The game is still not over though. With Wide Guard pressure from Lunala, Marco clicking Astral Barrage for a win is not that easy. This again is an incredibly complex turn. Let's consider some options. If Marco goes for Astral Barrage and Federico attacks with both, Marco wins on the spot. If Marco goes for Astral Barrage and Federico Wide Guards, Miraidon can take out Calyrex, giving the win to Federico. If Marco goes for Psychic while Federico attacks with both, Calyrex will move first, taking out Miraidon, while Calyrex will fall to Lunala, allowing Lunala to win a 1v1 against Rillaboom for Federico. If Marco goes for Psychic while Federico goes for Wide Guard, Miraidon goes down and Lunala is a sitting duck, which will lose the 2v1, winning the game for Marco. This seems like a 50-50, as half of these options Marco wins and half Federico wins. But the most threatening outcome is Federico attacking with both Pokemon and Marco going for an Astral Barrage, which would result in an instant loss for Federico. Whereas with the alternative routes, Lunala still might have a fighting chance. So Federico commits the Wide Guard to prevent this instant devastating loss. Lunala goes for Wide Guard, which blocks the Astral Barrage. Miraidon finishes off Calyrex with a Dazzling Gleam and chips Rillaboom. Rillaboom takes out Miraidon with a Wood Hammer. With just Lunala and Rillaboom left, and with Lunala's defense boost from the Electric Seed still active, Lunala easily wins the 1v1. Marco's only hope at winning would be to land some critical hits after the Shadow Shield was broken. They trade Moongeist Beams and Wood Hammers, but with no critical hit from either side, Rillaboom eventually faints to its own Wood Hammer recoil on turn 9. So what did we learn from game 1? The only significant thing we learned about speed tiers from this match is that Lunala was faster than Rillaboom. Again, it is not unexpected, but some Rillaboom are quite fast. With no overlapping Pokemon in this match, the rest of the speed tiers were as expected. This is a great match where Lunala showcases why it has such a strong matchup into the Calyrex-Zamazenta duo. Zamazenta can't touch it with Body Press, and Heavy Slam does minimal damage, while Calyrex cannot reliably land an Astral Barrage into it thanks to Wide Guard pressure. Even though Federico only used Wide Guard twice in the set, simply having it prompted a switch from Marco earlier, incentivized him to not use Astral Barrage when he took out Urshifu, and it was able to block the Astral Barrage in the endgame, providing insane value. With the Electric Seed set and all of Marco's physical attackers, Lunala is incredibly hard for him to break through. So what adjustments will they need to make? Marco really needs to be able to deal with Lunala to allow Calyrex to sweep. He does have Incineroar, whose dark typing will be crucial for dealing significant damage to it. Otherwise, Marco can try and put high pressure on Federico's other Pokemon and incentivize Lunala to not Wide Guard while he lands an Astral Barrage. Lunala being able to set Trick Room and steal the speed control as well makes Lunala the #1 threat to Marco's game plan, so he'll likely bring Incineroar over Ogerpon in this game too. Federico could go with the same game plan since he won, but he likely recognizes that the Wide Guard mind games do create somewhat of a 50-50, and if he can switch things up to do his Trick Room mode and keep Marco guessing, it might give him an advantage. Both of these adjustments are what we see from both players. Looking into game 2, Federico leads Lunala and Incineroar, while Marco leads Rillaboom and Zamazenta. Rillaboom and Zamazenta is Marco's best lead in this matchup, as it exerts offensive pressure from Zamazenta, while giving terrain priority against an opposing Miraidon lead. And it also allows Rillaboom to easily pivot out on turn 1 to safely bring in something like Calyrex. Marco wants to get damage on board, so he body presses into Incineroar, which would pick up a KO or deal big damage to anything that switches in. This may seem risky as Incineroar could fake out turn 1, stun Zamazenta, forcing it to eat an attack from Lunala. But Marco has the faster fake out with Rillaboom, and a fake out body press into Incineroar would guarantee that it goes down, as it cannot protect. To prevent this, Federico could Terra Bug, but he would get more value out of his Terra later on something else. Choosing to keep Incineroar safe this turn and preserve it for later, he opts to hard switch it into Miraidon to take control of the terrain and put his big damage online. Marco opts to U-turn into Lunala to also preserve Rillaboom in the back and keep his terrain control alive for later. Federico bringing in Miraidon does not want Trick Room up until Calyrex is the main threat, and since it's not on the field, he decides to deal some damage to Zamazenta with a Moongeist Beam. Incineroar swaps out for Miraidon, activating Lunala's Electric Seed, while Miraidon eats a Body Press, dealing about 77%, as Lunala's Moongeist Beam damages Zamazenta for around 30. Rillaboom U-turns into Lunala, bringing in Calyrex. Now that Calyrex is in, and Federico has no speed control online, Marco has the offensive advantage. We know that Wide Guard is one of Federico's best tools against Calyrex, and since Zamazenta still doesn't threaten Lunala very much, he can confidently use Wide Guard to prevent a devastating Astral Barrage. He also locks in Electro Drift from Miraidon into Calyrex, which will take a one-hit knockout if it lands. Marco here decides to go for Astral Barrage despite the Wide Guard pressure, and a Body Press into Miraidon. This Body Press will secure Miraidon goes down even if Federico goes for Wide Guard and removes Calyrex. It may seem that going for Astral Barrage here is a huge throw on Marco's end, and since whiffing into a Wide Guard means Calyrex will go down without dealing any damage. But if he goes for a turn like Psychic into Miraidon and Heavy Slam into Lunala, that could allow Lunala to set a Trick Room for the possible Ursaluna in the back. Marco would rather guarantee Federico does not get a Trick Room up, as he needs to maintain the speed advantage. And the only way he can guarantee no Trick Room goes up is by pressuring it with an Astral Barrage. But again, even if Calyrex goes down, using this offensive pressure to prevent the Trick Room is worth the trade-off. How does Marco know that Federico likely has Ursaluna in the back and even wants to go for Trick Room in the first place? Well, we already saw that he chose to bring in Incineroar this match, meaning there's only one team slot left. Whimsicott being the last slot, is unlikely, as getting Tailwind early is more beneficial, and Incineroar is not the best candidate to benefit from a Tailwind compared to something like Urshifu. With Whimsicott being unlikely, and Urshifu being less likely, that means Ursaluna is the most likely candidate, and Federico wants a Trick Room this game. So Federico needs to Wide Guard to prevent a Calyrex sweep, and Marco needs to Astral Barrage to prevent a Trick Room sweep. Lunala uses Wide Guard, blocking Calyrex's Astral Barrage, and Miraidon lands an Electro Drift into Calyrex, picking up a one-hit knockout. Zamazenta finishes off Miraidon with another Body Press, and Ursaluna comes in for Federico, as Incineroar comes in for Marco. Notably, the Intimidate drops Ursaluna's attack. Federico now needs Trick Room to win the game, and already having Ursaluna on field, he locks in Trick Room with Lunala. Thanks to the defense boost from the Electric Seed, Lunala should survive a double up from anything that Incineroar and Zamazenta can throw at it, and it's immune to Fake Out thanks to its typing. Typically, Ursaluna would protect this turn to guarantee the Flame Orb activation, allowing it to deal big damage next turn and move first after Trick Room is online. But Federico opts to commit his Terastallization to Ghost, and locks in a Headlong Rush into Incineroar, Lunala's main weakness. This gives Ursaluna a fighting immunity, meaning Zamazenta won't be able to immediately remove it with a Body Press. Marco expects a likely Protect from Ursaluna, and doubles into Lunala with Heavy Slam and Knockoff. He also Terastallizes Zamazenta to avoid a possible super effective Headlong Rush. Zamazenta Terastallizes to Water, and Ursaluna Terras to Ghost. Zamazenta's Heavy Slam does 19% to Lunala, and Incineroar's Knockoff critically hits, picking up the KO. Ursaluna responds with a Headlong Rush into Incineroar, which survives with 25%, thanks to both the Intimidate drop and Guts not yet being active. Incineroar comes in for Lunala. With Lunala removed, Trick Room not active, Ursaluna at -1 attack, defense, and special defense, and it being a 3v2, the game is sealed in Marco's favor. Marco's Incineroar swaps out for Rillaboom, allowing him to cycle Intimidates, and Zamazenta protects to stall for Grassy Terrain recovery. Fake Out and Facade both bounce off Zamazenta's Protect. Federico forfeits on turn 5 as he cannot outposition at this point. Both his Pokemon are weak to Intimidate and already have significant stat drops. So what did we learn from Game 2? Marco was able to swiftly take that game, even after sacrificing his Calyrex in order to prevent a Trick Room from going up. Like other sets, we see the immense value placed on playing to your win con. Marco only wins if he could prevent the Trick Room, and applying pressure with Calyrex for that one turn to prevent it is worth it, even if it meant Calyrex was going to go down. Let's consider the turn Lunala went down to that Heavy Slam and Knockoff. Did that critical hit matter for the KO? Lunala was at +1 defense, and it was not holding an item, meaning Knockoff's damage was significantly reduced. But it was still a stab 4x super effective hit, and Shadow Shield was not active. The only part of these Pokemon's EV spreads we know for sure is Lunala's HP. Depending on the spreads, it's possible that this critical hit didn't matter, but it's much more likely that the crit did matter for the KO. Incineroar would need to have significant attack investment for this, to even be a roll to KO without a critical hit. However, even a 0 attack Incineroar knockoff would have left Lunala with 10% HP or less. Although it would have allowed Trick Room to go up, it would have been very weak, and Marco still had a good chance to win the game, having a healthy Zamazenta and Intimidate on Ursaluna. With each player having won one game, the set comes to a Game 3. Marco should bring the same 4 Pokemon he just brought for the reasons mentioned earlier, as Incineroar makes a huge difference in dealing with Lunala. He could bring Ogerpon like he did in the first set, as it outspeeds Urshifu, and it can still provide support for Calyrex. Federico could go either way. He had a chance at winning Game 2 provided Lunala didn't eat that critical hit, but he also already won Game 1 with his Tailwind mode, so it's pretty evenly likely that he brings either. If he brings the same Pokemon from this game, he will need to change his focus on gaining speed control earlier, as he delayed setting Trick Room in Game 2. Let's look at the final game of the set. Marco well knows his best lead is Rillaboom Zamazenta, while Federico leads Lunala but brings Miraidon this time right away. Lunala gets its Electric Seed activation before Rillaboom takes control of the terrain. Miraidon is again weakened without its terrain and is an easy target for a Fake Out Body Press double up, which as mentioned, nothing on Federico's team wants to eat a Body Press except Lunala, but it's already on the field, making this a solid play for Marco. Federico can't afford to switch in Incineroar or Ursaluna and have them immediately lost to a Body Press, so he opts to keep Miraidon in and go for an Electro Drift and Moongeist Beam into Zamazenta. Rillaboom fakes out Miraidon as Zamazenta lands a Body Press into it. leaving it at just 9%. Lunala's Moongeist Beam lands into Zamazenta, dealing around 30%. Unlike last game, where Federico delayed getting Trick Room up, he sees an opportunity to secure Trick Room now, and to bring in Ursaluna to get the most out of Trick Room. Since Miraidon is so low, it's likely to feint to any attack from Marco's side. He opts to lock in Draco Meteor just to get as much damage on Rillaboom as possible, before going down while getting Trick Room up with Lunala. If Miraidon feints this turn while Lunala gets Trick Room up, that's a perfect switch in for Ursaluna. Although it won't have its burn activated until next turn, that's still a big momentum swing. Marco doesn't know for sure if Federico has Ursaluna in the back, as Federico's only led his 2 restricteds, not really giving insight as to whether he's going for a Tailwind or a Trick Room game this time around. He decides to guarantee Miraidon goes down with a body press into it, and he goes for U-turn into Lunala to reposition. Miraidon connects its Draco Meteor into Rillaboom, dealing around 70% as it falls to another body press from Zamazenta. Rillaboom U-turns Lunala and brings in Ogerpon. Lunala is able to set his Trick Room as Ursaluna switches in for the fallen Miraidon. It's possible that Marco expected Federico to again go for the Tailwind game, as we see him bring Ogerpon over Incineroar. With Trick Room up and Ursaluna on the field, the situation is dire for Marco. Ursaluna wants its Guts activation and is threatened by both of Marco's Pokemon with Grass and Fighting moves, so he goes for the obvious Protect. Marco, knowing this is the most likely play, doubles into Lunala with an Ivy Cudgel and Heavy Slam, and Lunala locks in Moongeist Beam into Zamazenta. Ursaluna protects, and Lunala Moongeist beams Zamazenta. With a critical hit, it's left at around 10%. An Ivy Cudgel and Heavy Slam both land into Lunala, leaving it at 61% after Grassy Terrain recovery. Ursaluna's Flame Orb activates, bringing its Guts online. With the defense boost on Lunala, it was able to eat both of those attacks incredibly well. And with the critical hit on Zamazenta, Marco's goal of stalling the Trick Room and bringing in Calyrex got that much harder. Since Marco didn't protect last turn, he can this time with both his Pokemon. With Federico's Ursaluna online and Zamazenta at low HP, Federico threatens picking up 2 KOs this turn. However, protecting with both Pokemon would just leave Marco in the same situation next turn, open to a double up. With Zamazenta being so low, he opts to attack with it while protecting Ogerpon. Federico makes the best offensive play he has by using Headlong Rush into Ogerpon and Moongeist Beam into Zamazenta. Headlong Rush may seem suboptimal, since it will lower Ursaluna's defenses, and Facade would just pick up the KO anyways. But Headlong Rush should be more than enough damage to pick up this KO, provided this isn't a near max bulk Ogerpon. And Headlong Rush also covers a possible switch to Calyrex, which would be immune to Facade. Federico also Terras Ursaluna to be immune to a body press, remove its Grass weakness, and be immune to future fakeouts. Ursaluna Terras to Ghost and Ogerpon uses Spiky Shield. Headlong Rush runs into the Spiky Shield, taking some recoil. Lunala's Moongeist Beam finishes off the weakened Zamazenta, as Marco brings in Calyrex. Time really does fly in these high stakes games, and there's only 2 turns of Trick Room remaining, and both targets are weak to an Astral Barrage from Calyrex. But it's still not time for Marco to attack with it yet. He opts to protect to stall and swap in Rillaboom. Federico, on the other hand, sees another possible play from Marco that he needs to respect. Follow Me plus an Astral Barrage with Terra Dark from Calyrex would be detrimental. Ogerpon would take the Headlong Rush, and Calyrex would survive an attack from Lunala while responding with 2 KOs, considering both of Federico's Pokemon are weak to Astral Barrage, and this would win Marco the game on the spot. With this immense pressure, Federico needs to respect it with Wide Guard, and he opts to target Calyrex with the Headlong Rush, meaning if it attacks, it will still go down. And if Ogerpon redirects it, then Ogerpon will go down. Rillaboom comes in for Ogerpon as Calyrex protects. Lunala goes for Wide Guard as Headlong Rush bounces off of Calyrex's Protect. We're down to the last turn of Trick Room, and Marco needs to decide how he will position Calyrex on the field to take control of it after Trick Room expires. Calyrex cannot reliably protect this turn for an easy stall, as it just protected, and Rillaboom has no fake out pressure since both foes are immune. This means he needs to make a switch or risk a double protect. Not wanting to risk the double protect, he swaps out Calyrex for Ogerpon and goes for Grassy Glide with Rillaboom into Ursaluna. Federico makes the most out of his last Trick Room turn and goes for Headlong Rush into Calyrex and Moongeist Beam into Rillaboom, which is very likely to pick up both KOs. Calyrex swaps out for Ogerpon, which survives the incoming Headlong Rush at less than 5%. Grassy Glide does 27% to Ursaluna, and Lunala's Moongeist Beam connects into Rillaboom, also leaving it with less than 5%. What a turn of events. It may seem that these grass types surviving that onslaught was a huge win for Marco, and he clearly did want Ogerpon alive next to Calyrex to provide Follow Me support. But having both of them survive actually completely shot his chances of winning. As we see, he likely wanted Rillaboom to faint here, which would have given him a free switch into Calyrex, as this was the turn he needed Calyrex on the field ready to attack. But since both grass types survived, Calyrex is stuck in the back of the party. Lunala now can easily set up another Trick Room, or Federico can simply clean up with Ursaluna. At this point, Marco really has no shot back in the game, especially with a full HP Incineroar, walling both his grass types and Calyrex. Ursaluna swaps out for Incineroar, which intimidates both these physical grass types. Spiky Shield comes out from Ogerpon, and Wood Hammer lands into Incineroar. Rillaboom goes down to Recoil as Lunala sets Trick Room for the second time. Calyrex comes in for Rillaboom. The game is over at this point for Marco. He's lost speed control and is down to Pokemon. Calyrex uses Protect while Lunala uses Wide Guard, and Incineroar finishes off Ogerpon with a knockoff, leaving Calyrex in a 3v1. Marco plays out the last turn of the event, terastallizing Calyrex to Dark, resisting the knockoff but going down to Lunala's Moonblast. So what can we learn from Game 3? Well, we saw Federico play much better to his win con, as he put more emphasis on getting Trick Room up early in the match, which put him way ahead. We also found out that Marco's Ogerpon is actually quite bulky, as it just barely survived that headlong rush from Ursaluna. We also again saw the pressure that Wide Guard exerted. Even without even being clicked, it had a huge impact on this game. And we saw both players adjust when Federico brought the same Pokemon for his Trick Room game plan Game 3, whereas Marco reverted and brought Ogerpon again. Perhaps Marco was expecting Federico to run the same Pokemon that won him the first game, whereas Federico decided to commit to the Trick Room game plan again. Had Marco continued to use Incineroar in Game 3, he would have had a much better chance at taking this set. And that's a piece of the mind game that often gets overlooked in best of 3 sets, is how players adjust from Game 1 to 2, but also from Game 2 to 3, where Federico is kind of expected to take what won the first game. And again, we see Marco adjust to that, expecting Federico to take what won. However, Federico also likely realized that what won him the first game also probably wouldn't have performed very well into an Incineroar game plan rather than Ogerpon, as having 2 choice-locked Pokemon, as mentioned, makes him very vulnerable to Fake Out, which is something Marco was able to take advantage of in each game. This is an incredible set, played very well by both players. If you've made it this far and are interested in supporting the channel grow further, feel free to check out the Patreon. I do offer coaching if you feel you would benefit from something like analysis like this, applied to your own games and gameplay. I'd like to give a huge thanks to all the patrons who support the channel, and thank you for watching.